they have been targeted by Russia and China. I think there is some good evidence in the case that Russia has been responsible, at least for a couple of those Havana syndrome cases. And I think China is also very likely to attack US government personnel. So there have been also cases in China and cases with a China connection. And and I don't know whether the US government is
Sure.
using it offensively against adversaries.
A quick break to share with you this wonderful product called Masterpiece. It is proven to taking out graphene oxide, aluminums, heavy metals, microplastics. They also are looking at these MAC addresses, and there's more and more research and there's studies coming out. There's 4 documentaries that are being made on their studies of how they're able to disable MAC addresses that are somehow put into people. This is amazing stuff. I highly recommend. I buy a whole box of it and I make sure my whole family has it. If you are interested in trying this and really cleaning up your body from microplastics, graphene oxide, you can also test yourself. You can get your hair test to see what you are before and what you are after you use this for a few months. They stand behind what they're doing with tests, studies, and real results. And look for the link below where you can buy Masterpiece yourself. It'll provide you a discount, or you can go to sarahwestall.com under shop. Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. I have Dr. Armin Krishnan coming back to the program. He was part of my series that I did on Brighteon on mind control and 5th generation warfare, where he says that the military, for all practical purposes, aren't that relevant anymore because they're bypassing conventional military warfare and going directly to the citizens to control your mind. And that is a pretty profound idea, that warfare has completely changed and they're no longer traditional methods of warfare. It's really directly to you and controlling your mind. And we're living in it right now. And he's going to come back and he's going to talk about Havana syndrome and Neurostrike and the different frequency weapons that have been deployed in the past and by governments all over the world that can harm people's minds and bodies. And specifically, he wrote a book on Havana syndrome and military neural weapons and what is available, what isn't, and where is Congress and the different governments at for acknowledging that this technology exists, and what can we do to protect people within the government and outside the government? How do you protect targeted individuals? Do targeted individuals exist? Which is pretty clear that they do, because you need to develop these weapons somehow. And the only way that you can develop them is through, a covert targeting. And that's what we're seeing. And so we're going to talk about that. Who's doing it? He doesn't say who's doing it, but he's going from a university professor standpoint, he's going to talk about the research and what he can talk about. He says this is his own opinions. It doesn't represent the university that he works for. He has to be careful because there's always is that the universities don't frown upon anything that puts them out there and makes them look bad. So he's saying this is from his own opinion. And he also, it's worth noting that he has trained military personnel and people in intelligence on what is going on. And it's a great honor to have him back and to be working with me on this. And the most important thing is to bring the awareness to the people so that we can demand some protection for not only the people in the government, but for average citizens. I advocate for, if there are already solutions developed within the military and they aren't allowed to talk about it openly, please leak it to some private organizations, private companies. Leak those solutions, the technology that can help average citizens, and let's figure out a way to, it doesn't have to be open, the government doesn't have to acknowledge it, but these solutions can work for the average citizen and we can bring some relief to targeted individuals. I think that is a reasonable way to deal with some of this. But before I get into this, I want to remind you that I have a series of exclusives that I've been putting up on my Substack, from the peptide webinar I did with Diane Kaiser to my second part with Darius Wright, who is someone that talks about near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences, which is really fascinating. And then also with Scott Ketterson, who has extensive experience in information warfare within the military and with the Department of Defense. I think you will like that conversation as well. So if you are interested in seeing any of that, go to sarahwestall.substack.com. Okay, here is my conversation with someone who's becoming a friend of mine, Dr. Armin Krishnan. Hi, Armin. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for bringing me back to your show. You've done so amazing work over the last years. I've really started paying attention to your shows.
Oh, well, great. Thank you for that. Well, you were in my my series that we did that was with as a partnership with Brighteon. And as the expert, you were the first episode talking about, fifth generation warfare and mind control. But it went, of course, we're beyond fifth generation warfare into there's a lot more to what's going on. But you did a recent book, and you've been doing so much more really great work, writing books, doing studies, teaching people. You've taught people in the military, you've taught at a university, on what the warfare capabilities are when it comes to mind control or damage to the brain. And specifically, you've been focusing on, well, not just Havana syndrome. I know you've gone beyond that, but specifically, you've brought some clarity to Havana syndrome. Can you talk about, before I get into that, explain people what you're doing right now and what your background is, because it's very impressive. And then we're going to get into some more of your research.
Well, I'm an associate professor at East Carolina University, and I'm teaching international relations, intelligence studies, foreign policy. And yeah, I have to say that anything I'm telling you today is not in any way related to East Carolina University. It's just my personal opinion. And yeah, I've done research into military technology, military ethics, covert action, and more recently, I've looked into neuro warfare and Havana syndrome. So that relates to directed energy weapons, and that's kind of the future of war.
It really is. It might have actually been the near past of war as well, right? I mean, it's pretty developed. It's not something that is just futuristic. It's been in the works for a while.
Yeah, I would say it started back in the 1960s when they were looking into directed energy weapons. In particular, they were developing lasers and microwave technology. And yeah, we've come a very long way. And now these weapon systems are getting put into the field. So they are real-world technology and they are operational. However, most of what's publicly known about directed energy weapons is focused on anti-material applications.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, drone warfare, or the lasers attacking drones or aircraft, or missiles, so missile defenses. So we know about the high-powered microwaves that produce an EMP-like effect, so they're frying electronics. So all of that is known and out in the public. What's not known is the anti-personnel applications. So that relates to the effects, the bioeffects that these weapon systems could have when they are targeted at people. And obviously there is a problem in terms of the research because of the need of human experimentation.
That's absolutely right. So all these targeted individuals that come forward saying they've been targeted, you can't dismiss that because they need the experimentation to be able to develop it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that from MKUltra. So that was a CIA project from 1953 to 1964 and was continued as an in-house project until 1972. And they were conducting human experiments on also unwitting test subjects. So it was non-consensual. and in some cases, they have done very grave harm to people. So
That's right. And it's not just the US military, it's pretty much every single major country in the world, right?
yes, there's a lot of speculation about human experimentation going on in places like China and Russia and Iran. Uh, uh,
Why
so,
wouldn't
so
they be,
it's,
right? I mean, they all are doing it.
uh, yes, I mean, obviously it's very secretive
I
because
wouldn't
of
say
the
why
ethical
wouldn't they be.
implications.
Hold on. The why wouldn't they be is obvious, but you know what I'm saying. Keep going.
Yeah, because of the ethical implications, no government wants to admit to it. I mean, technically speaking, it violates international law. It goes against the Nuremberg Code. So that was established after the Second World War as an ethical principle that any human experimentation has to follow certain strict rules. One of it, it should not harm the human subject, and there needs to be a benefit to the human subject for doing those experiments.
And that's right. In Japan, they did all those experiments as well. I mean, there's proof and factual proof and documentation historical that not only the United States has done that, but so has all these other countries. And the United States, you know, we have the syphilis program. Remember with in the big
Oh yeah.
syphilis program? I mean, that was MK Ultra. I mean, we've done a lot of things in this country that has even after the what do you call it, the code, right after the Nuremberg Code came out,
Mhm.
we were doing it after all these principles were established, and we still did it. So what is going to keep us from doing it, or any other country around the world? These are real problems, right? And we need to not only expose them, but we need to start coming up with, and people haven't talked about this, but maybe, you know, after people hear some of your information, we need to come up with ways to protect citizens from being targets of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems to affect a larger number of people. I don't know how many. I mean, I've been contacted, obviously, by a lot of people
Mhm.
who want to share their story, and they
Oh,
give me
yeah.
information,
Yeah.
and that is also driving some of my research. And obviously, it's difficult to estimate or evaluate whether people are suffering from mental illness or whether there's some truth to what they are saying. But if you take into account the history of unethical experimentation on humans, the fact that we have directed energy weapons and that they have bioeffects that are poorly researched, at least in the public, and yeah, there are accounts that seem to be very credible. And when you look at the Havana syndrome, we have very credible people talking about getting targeted with likely directed energy weapons.
Well,
So we know about that.
I was at the targeted, yeah, we do know about that. I was at the targeted individual conference, and I stayed with the board, and Len Bear was there, and
Mhm.
he's an MD, and he's been claiming he's been a target of Havana or, you know, directed energy weapons. And even Giordano himself wrote a letter on his behalf saying don't target civilians, and he was formally diagnosed with Havana syndrome. And I was at this conference, you know, in at the house staying, and when we were staying there, he was being tortured like every 15 minutes. He was just going into this torturous state of being blasted with something. And I don't think somebody could fake that. I sat and we experienced it. I sat there and watched him be tortured every 15 minutes. And it was, he truly was affected by something. And it's incredible to watch this. I agree with you that some people, it's very hard to distinguish the difference between somebody who maybe has a mental illness and people who are uh, seriously targeted. And
Mhm.
then the people that are seriously targeted can develop some mental illness or can even come across as mentally ill. So this whole thing is one big gray area.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's it's very difficult in terms of the psychiatric diagnosis because sometimes the people doing it may try to create the impression that the person is actually mentally ill, so that it fits into the diagnosis in psychiatry for schizophrenia and other kinds of mental illnesses.
And it does cleanly, in a lot of cases, fit. Like if you're hearing voices in your head, or if you're hearing some of these things that could, which isn't that difficult of a technology now to direct the sound frequency to your ear. People should research it. The technology isn't all that complex, and it's not. It's been around for a while now, decades now. That same technology and that same real ability actually comes across as a mental schizophrenia or another mental illness that is cleanly defined by a mental illness.
Yes. I mean, that was also an aspect in the MK Ultra research. In order to cover their tracks, they created situations that were so absurd that any person talking about it would come across as mentally ill. Um,
To
so,
somebody who hasn't seen it themselves or experienced it.
yeah, exactly. I mean,
And
that's also the argument against Havana syndrome as a deliberate attack. So the claim is that people may be making it up, that it's psychosomatic, that they may have pre-existing conditions. The major claim here is that it's mass psychogenic illness, so that people believe that they've been exposed to some external harm, and then they materialize the symptoms of what they think they have been exposed to. And in some cases, that may be the truth of the matter, and in others, it's much more difficult to explain it away in that manner. So,
Well, and let's talk about the history of Havana syndrome. I know that
yep.
when I started doing this work, it was pretty available. I could get so much research on Google and elsewhere. Now, some of the AIs, you can get that as well, or you need to go to a browser outside of the United States to get some more detailed information and some of the university studies outside the US, unfortunately. But it exists if you want to dig a little bit more. But when I first started doing this work, it was much more accessible. And I could read where the science was and what was going on. Is it in your research and what you're doing, did you find a little bit of walls that were up, or was it easily accessible to you?
Well, there has been a lot of media reporting on Havana syndrome. I mean, there have been lots of documentaries, shows, newspaper articles, magazine articles. I mean, a couple of the victims, prominent victims, have spoken out and they've given interviews. So we have a lot of information on Havana syndrome, which is said to only affect government personnel. So that's the focus on Havana syndrome. So we are looking at people who have worked for the US government, also in a national security capacity. And those stories seem to be quite credible because they're also high-level people who have been affected by this.
And it's
And
people that were in Cuba that were targeted with
yeah,
directed energy weapons while they were in Cuba, right? That's why it's Havana syndrome.
yeah, it apparently started in December 2016. So that was kind of the first case. And then there was a whole wave of cases in spring 2017. And in August 2017, it made the news media. So there was a story by Associated Press, and they speculated about a sonic weapon that may have been used to harm diplomats on Cuba. And yeah, at the time, there were 21 American individuals, embassy personnel and their dependents affected, and 14 Canadian diplomats and dependents affected. And many of them had to be taken out of the country and had to receive medical care in Miami. And there they've received a diagnosis of concussion or concussion-like effects. So it's a whole pattern of symptoms. It's mostly known for the audible effects. So they've heard some strange noises, some chirping or buzzing sound. it was very loud. So that was the first thing they experienced. Then there were the panic attack, a psychological effect, and then the vestibular disturbances, so the balance issues, vertigo, and visual distortions, blurred vision, and very strong headaches, and tinnitus, um, and later also memory loss, brain fog, and yeah, general neurodegenerative issues. So that didn't go away afterwards. So the exposure time was probably just 30 seconds or a few minutes. And then the effects continued over months, years. So some people are still affected after a long time by this attack.
Well, and I think the fact that, like Len Bear, being a civilian who is officially diagnosed by the same Miami doctors and facility is a major problem because it shows that civilians, and that's what Giordano wrote in a letter for him saying we should not be targeting civilians. He is an inconvenient person that shows that civilians might be being targeted too, because it's one thing if government employees are targeted and it's a foreign government such as Russia, which they're claiming on the blame for this Havana syndrome going on in Cuba. It's a whole nother deal when we're talking about civilians in our country being targeted.
I think these could be different issues, and there could be different perpetrators, different contexts in which that is happening. I don't know, but I think it's plausible that there is some unethical human experimentation going on in this country and in many other countries. And then there's also something else going on. So we have adversaries targeting key US government personnel to destabilize the US government, to cause us harm, and to test their weapons. I think that the Havana syndrome weapon is very sophisticated. It's far ahead of anything we've seen in previous times. So there were previous episodes where there was a speculation about directed energy attacks. So that was the Moscow signal. And that was in the 1960s and 1970s.
Yeah, because there's a well-documented case of in Moscow themselves having an issue. Because I remember writing about it and adding it into a mini documentary I have. So it's been around since at least the 60s. I'm sorry, keep going.
Yeah, but I think it's a much more sophisticated weapon.
Yep.
And there's a big mystery how it actually works. So that is the problem when you're researching Havana syndrome. You come across a variety of technologies and ways of it could be possibly done, but the
Could it be multiple ways, though? I mean, couldn't it be multiple ways? Because we know that it's different
I think
frequency.
there
It
are
could be like
different
a
types of
whole bunch of different weapons.
Yeah, there are different types of weapons. I mean, James Giordano has suggested that there are at least two different types of ultrasonic type weapons. And then there's one type of microwave type, pulsed microwave weapon. So that can account for the different kind of experiences that people had. And so that we are talking about actually very different types of weapons and exposures.
Yeah, multiple different types of weapons, just like the voice to skull weapon, which there was an infamous TED talk where the CEO of the company said, yeah, we did it. And that was during the Iraq war where all these soldiers surrendered. It was a TED talk that's now I can't find. So they must have pulled it. I was, hindsight being 2020, I would have downloaded it. But he admitted that his company developed it and that this is what it did, and all these Iraqi soldiers surrendered. That is probably in the family of the weapons we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. There was an ITV report from 1991 about psychological warfare in the Gulf. And the way it worked was that they were attacking Iraqi soldiers in the tanks, they had their headphones on to listen to radio, and they were transmitting some ultrasound signal with subliminal messages that was inducing extreme fear. And they were supposed to constantly listening to the radio, and and a consequence of that was that they were surrendering, that they were
In
panicking,
mass. Yeah.
and yeah, I think that's a very plausible story.
Well, and unless the CEO that came up and said that was lying and he did a TED Talk, it was pretty amazing, when you look back on it, knowing how much censorship there is now, how open the internet was back then is pretty profound, the difference. But where are we right now with the admitting that Havana syndrome is real?
Well, we are getting closer to it. So the current administration seems to be taking some action towards uncovering the mystery of Havana syndrome. So there has been a notable shift from the Biden administration, which tried to bury it. You know about the ODNI updated assessment on anomalous health incidents from March 2023, where they were saying it was very unlikely that there was an adversary targeting US personnel. And now they are, well, at least Congress is putting some pressure on them to revise that. And I'm hoping that Tulsi Gabbard and Marco Rubio would be also moving the thing further along. So I see some positive signs that there's a greater willingness to uncover the mystery, but apparently there's also a claim of a cover-up by the intelligence community.
Well, I'm sure, right? They're going to cover it up. I would like to see them not only admit to it, identify it, just like with so many of these other issues, admit that this is happening and identify it, and then make efforts to protect not only government employees, but civilians. These trillions of dollars that you spend, or billions of dollars you spend on defense, actually spend it on some defense for our civilians who are being targeted by this.
Well, there are a couple of explanations why there could be a cover-up. So the first thing I can think of is that they understand that US personnel is vulnerable, but they don't have any way of protecting them. So they don't want to admit the vulnerability and give enemies further ideas that they can be attacked.
But they know. I mean, come on, they know. Keep going. They're not. They know.
Yeah, but it's still a problem for the government to admit that they can't protect their own people. And the other thing is, it's very hard to find evidence for the attacks. So since
where
the
it's
attacks,
coming from or who it's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. You would need to catch the perpetrator in the act. And that can be very difficult because an attack can occur in any place at any time. And then you have only a couple of minutes to figure out that you are on attack and where the attack is coming from. So the odds of catching somebody doing it are very slim. And that was the main argument by the CIA, that they couldn't find any evidence that any adversary was involved because they only start investigating after the fact. So the attack is already over, and then they try to find traces or people who were there at the time. And that can be very difficult to come to any conclusions. And then the dilemma for the government is, can you accuse another government of attacking your personnel if you don't have any evidence for it? Because technically it's an act of war.
Just a quick break from the program. I need to share with you an urgent matter about scam gold IRAs and the important need to make sure that you're working with a trusted company in the precious metals space. I have had hundreds of people come to me now where they have lost 50, 60, 70% of their life savings in these scam gold IRAs, We are having nearly 100% success rate getting their money back. If you have put your life savings into a gold IRA, I implore you to look and see if you have been scammed. Don't trust the company that sold it to you. Make sure you understand what you can get as a buyback value for the gold or silver that you have in your IRA. If you have noticed a significant drop in what you invested, you have more than likely been scammed. We can help you, and there's no shame. Go to sarahwestall.com/Miles Franklin, fill out that form, and we will help you get your life savings back. That is, yes, it is an act of war. But what about the civilians who are being targeted? They should be, they know, and they can easily identify that. And, why are they not? Are there groups within that you know of that are within the government that are developing a defense for civilians who have no protection?
Well, I think that there's some research underway within NATO countries about protecting personnel against directed energy attacks. So they are certainly aware of the vulnerability that exists. But they don't like to talk about civilians at the moment. They like to keep it at the level of national security and protecting the military. Yeah, one issue is that they may have those weapons already. So they may be hiding that technology, the intelligence community. So they don't want to admit that they have it and that they may be using those weapons as well. So that's another motivation for the cover-up that I can see. And the other thing that is obvious is the possibility of human experimentation going on in the realm of national security. That is unethical, and that would be a problem if it was disclosed to the public.
But historically speaking, that all comes out, right? And they end up looking worse in the long run. And then the people that were targeted of this, whether it's the syphilis experiment or MK Ultra, the public at large knows it exists. They look worse in the long run, and then people are just, the trust in the institutions actually erode further.
Well, you have to look at it from the perspective of the people who are responsible. They may be legally accountable for what they've done. So they may have broken some laws in doing that. And they would certainly try to avoid that accountability. And I think it's also very highly classified. So very few people are read into those programs. And they are under secrecy oaths. So they are not allowed to talk about it. And if they would be talking about it, then they may face prison for violating their secrecy oath.
Yeah, you're going to face prison for violating your secrecy oath for disclosing the fact that we're targeting and hurting, doing something unethical that isn't legal. But I think if you disclose something that's not legal, that you're protected from it from that standpoint. But we know when we're dealing with the corrupt government, it's kind of messy in that area.
Well, there's whistleblower protection for ordinary government people, but it's different in the intelligence community. If you want to be a whistleblower, the only recourse you have is that you can contact a member of Congress. You're not allowed to talk to the press or leak documents to the public. You're not allowed to do that. If you do that, you still face prison time. And if Congress is not responsive, then you are out of options.
That's really too bad because we have obvious people that are targeted that need some help. What is Neurostrike? You write about that as well.
Yes, that is a concept developed by Robert McCreight. So he was working for the State Department, and he was closely involved with several of the Havana syndrome investigations. And he developed that concept to describe a weapon that causes Havana syndrome. So he described it as a neurodisruptor It could be a handheld device that can remotely attack people and disrupt their brain and central nervous system and cause permanent harm to to them and have cognitive effects.
And how broad of an implementation does he think it is? Is it something that the military is already doing to our adversaries in active combat areas, or is it also within like spy organizations where they're doing it for critical or not even critical for missions for whatever agenda they're trying to get across and across the world, not just our government, but other governments?
Well, I don't have any information about that. We can only speculate.
That's
Obviously,
fair. I mean, I don't
McCrae,
either. I'm asking you because I don't know either. But if I was going to speculate, I would think that's pretty widespread and it's being used wherever they think that it can further their agenda. That's my assessment. But what do you think?
I don't know whether the US government is using that technology. I think that they have been targeted by Russia and China. I think there is some good evidence in the case that Russia has been responsible, at least for a couple of those Havana syndrome cases. And I think China is also very likely to attack US government personnel. So there have been also cases in China and cases with a China connection. And and I don't know whether the US government is
Sure.
using it offensively against adversaries. Uh,
We'd like to think that our government has higher ethical standards. I don't, historically they really haven't. If you look at it compared to, MK Ultra and the syphilis program they ran. But, China has been caught the government of China doing organ
mm,
harvesting, right? If a government has let organ harvesting go on in mass, which there's evidence of that, there would be no ethical line. And this is not that far. I mean, this is a very easy ethical line for them to cross because they already blew past it for when they were doing organ harvesting.
yeah, absolutely. I don't think that China or the Chinese government would have a problem with respect to using that technology offensively and covertly. And I think that the same applies to Russia, sadly. So in Russia, they have also a history of unethical experimentation, and they are also likely to use that offensively and covertly.
Well, and if there's any rogue organizations within our government who are involved in human trafficking or organ trafficking or anything like that, who also happen to have access to this technology, they already blew past the red line of ethics. So, that's what we don't know.
yeah, I mean, it's very
I'm
highly
being, I mean,
classified. It's
yeah, but that's the reality of the situation, right?
uh, yeah, I think that there are some better checks and balances in the United States compared to other countries. I mean, I've heard really bad things happening in Germany
Mm.
with respect to that technology. I mean, you've heard about the candidates dying
Like eight of
ahead
them
of
or
the
nine of
election.
them. Yeah.
And there's the allegation that the German government may be using directed energy for um, harming people, torturing people, and killing people. So there could be even Western countries where it's much worse compared to the United States.
What do you think is necessary? Maybe you haven't thought about this yet, but what do you think is necessary from a civilian protection standpoint? We need our government employees, our military needs protection, and so do especially the civilians who have been targeted. What do you think needs to be done?
Well, the first thing is people need to be aware of the danger. So they need to understand that there is this technology and people can get harmed doing that, and it can be covert, it can be deniable, and they need to understand at least a part of the technology involved, and that may be an opportunity to protect yourself. At the moment, the government isn't doing much in terms of protecting civilians. I mean, that seems to be the sad reality. And yeah, what we can try to do is just to uncover more about the technology itself.
The more we can uncover, the more people are aware, the more there's an urgency to come up with tools to protect innocent individuals.
Yeah, I mean, the free market might provide some solutions. I mean, there are companies that are offering special equipment and materials and things for people to protect themselves against directed energy attacks. I mean, there seems to be already a market for that.
There is a market for that. I would like the military, if they have this technology, to somewhat quietly leak every single thing they possibly can to some of those companies so that they can, that if they know how to protect people, figure out how to leak it to these companies and develop solutions. And maybe they already have. I don't know.
Yeah, we can only hope that, I mean, there should be more pressure on the government in terms of doing something about it. Because the problem is not going to go away. I don't think that the Havana syndrome cases have stopped. I think that at some point they have to address it because their own people are getting harmed.
That's right. And they can't afford for high-level diplomats, and they can't afford for civilians who are speaking loudly of it to just go unprotected.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm hopeful that something is still coming out of the newer investigations into Havana syndrome. So there was a recent Senate House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence report from December last year, where they were complaining about the lack of cooperation that they've received from the intelligence community regarding the release of documents and records about the anomalous health incidents. And yeah, and a recent thing I've heard is that the director of the DIA got fired because he was mishandling the investigation into the anomalous health incidents. So perhaps the Trump administration is trying to do something.
Well, that's good. I mean, if he was mishandling it, then that's great. Hopefully, there is more pressure. I know that Tulsi Gabbard seems like, I mean, because she was targeted herself with the Quiet Skies program, and nothing gets you motivated more than being personally targeted.
Yeah, I mean, there are also members in Congress who have taken an interest in that. So there was a Homeland Security Subcommittee hearing in 2024 where they had some high-level witnesses. And that was Greg Edgreen, who was in charge of the investigation in the DIA on the anomalous health incidents. And then there was Christo Grozev, who was the journalist who conducted the investigation into the connection with GRU Unit 29155. And then there was Mark Said. He is a national security lawyer who has represented several victims of Havana syndrome. And they gave very interesting testimonies that you can find on the internet. And their conclusion was that there are at least 68 credible cases. And altogether, they've recorded over 1,500 cases. But at least 68, there's apparently very good evidence that people have been targeted and harmed. And they also spoke about the device that could cause the Havana syndrome. And Christo Grozev was saying that he has seen an earlier version of the weapon from 1991, and that it was not very big, so smaller than a backpack. So it could be used from a car, and it would have at least a range of tens of meters or hundreds of meters.
And it'll be interesting as this comes out and more people are aware of it, and hopefully it'll bring more whistleblowers out to say about what other kinds of weapons are actually ready to go, from uh, affecting our emotions to all sorts of other applications that are being used.
Yes, I mean, there have been whistleblowers. I mean, there have been lots of leaks.
There
The
has
problem
been.
with the leaks is just they tend to be anonymous, and then it's very hard to
That's right.
confirm. And often there is no documentary evidence behind it because even if you work in the intelligence community, you can't really take any documents, any classified documents and give them to the public. So, so that would be a major crime. So they can only leak a little bit of information here and there, and then we have to piece it together.
Don't you think that, okay, the fact that, and I understand from one perspective, but we almost need to deconstruct the fact that it's a crime to be transparent, and that the whole notion of making everything classified also allows criminal activity to absolutely flourish within our government. And so the laws themselves are made to protect criminals if they exist in that community. And so we have an issue, a structural issue, a flaw with just how that is established. The fact that it's illegal to even talk about activities that could be highly illegal is a flaw.
Well, the intelligence community will tell you that they have to protect sources and methods, that all their work couldn't, and that
But
they
you know
couldn't
what I'm saying.
operate without that amount of secrecy, and that secrecy serves a clear purpose.
But it
And
also serves a clear purpose of covering up government crime. And so, you know, what do you think of that?
well, I think that in the area of, in the realm of national security, you need to have a certain degree of secrecy because it relates to vulnerability and it relates to your ability to collect on others. And yeah, I understand that this is a problem for democratic accountability. And the way we tried to solve this dilemma is by way of intelligence oversight. So we have the intelligence oversight committees in Congress that are supposed to look into potential abuses by the intelligence community. The flaw in this system is that the intelligence community can just refuse to provide complete and accurate information to Congress. And Congress has no ability to really check whether they've received everything and whether it's accurate what they've received. And yeah, we've seen that with the NSA surveillance debate. In the end, it looks like the intelligence community violated our constitutional rights and got away with it.
Well, it's kind of like the Comey thing. There's a whole room of additional FBI files that they found that
Mhm.
were never, that weren't disclosed. So it's just this continual thing where Congress is not able to do proper oversight because they don't allow those documents forward. So it is what I'm talking about. I understand the national security because we can't be so naive that we aren't dealing with enemies such as China or Russia or even criminal cartels, whatever it is that will harm us, right? So they have to be smart. But the same standpoint, if they aren't able to have proper oversight, then the criminals can flourish inside those organizations, and there's evidence that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, originally, when the intelligence community was founded in 1947, it was fairly small. And it was easier to have some oversight over them or to keep track of what they were doing because it was still relatively small. But now it has gotten so big and government secrecy has gotten so enormous that nobody knows all the secrets. I mean, it's a huge problem for the government itself to keep track of its own secrets. Uh,
It's just this mess, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's only a very small number of people who have access, a high-level access to information, and yeah, and most people in the government they just are not read into those secrets.
Well, and the problem is when there's only a small number of people that even have access to it, we are dependent on those people even being ethical individuals and not criminals themselves.
Yeah,
What kind of process do we go through to make sure those people are even ethical?
yeah, that's a huge problem. I mean, that's why we are talking about the deep state. So that is the assumed network of mid-level to high-level intelligence officials and national security officials who have access to the secrets and who can determine national security policy and who can, who are in a position to sabotage the elected government or simply not respond to the directions of the elected government. And we've seen that.
What do you think about the deep state being spun from a political standpoint to just mean the Democrats? I think that is a mistake by some political operatives to spin it to just mean deep state equals Democrats versus deep state equals deep state, like what you're talking about.
Well, there's a very good book by Michael Glennon. He is a political scientist, I think, at Tufts University. He wrote a book, The Double Government, from 2014. And he claims that there is the Madisonian government, the elected government, and then there is the so-called hidden government or the Trumanite network. So that was apparently established early in the Cold War. And that is a network of those mid-level to senior national security officials who share the same ideology and they are sharing the same experiences and they believe that in the name of national security, they have special rights to do whatever it takes to protect the United States. So they are not bound by the law. And they are very influential and they can oppose presidents. Because
they have the power
they
over
have
them.
careers that are very long. So if you look at people like John Brennan or Michael Hayden or James Clapper, they've been in there for decades in senior positions.
That's right.
So they have access, they've had access to a lot of secrets.
Well,
And
the
that gives them
president
a lot
going
of
in,
power.
and the president going in for 4 years or even 8 years, they have more power than them, or they ride them out for a certain amount of time, or they, right? I mean, how do they override them? Do they override them through just bureaucratic means?
Yeah, I mean, there's bureaucratic resistance. I mean, you can simply delay implementation of decisions. That's the easiest way. You can ignore. You can shape the information that the senior decision makers, the elected government receives. I mean, we've had the stories of people stealing documents from Trump's desk because they didn't want him to see that information. I mean, if you are a president, you have no ability to read or
Yeah.
process all the information that you theoretically access to. And they can give you only certain pieces of information and leave out a major part of that. And there's no ability to check, really.
Well, and it's like anything else. If you go and you run an organization and the majority of the people under you don't want to follow you and they won't follow you and they have their own agendas, that's extremely difficult. That's why executives come in and they get rid of the entire, managing organization and bring in their own people for that very same reason.
Yeah, but you can't really do that in
In the
in national
government.
security because it's very disruptive. It's
Yeah.
very hard to replace people. I mean, if you have a career in national security spanning several decades, you represent a body of knowledge and expertise that is very hard to replace.
It doesn't work that way, right?
So that makes it difficult to simply fire everybody Because if you do that, then the organization also becomes dysfunctional.
Well, but they do that with their own cabinet and everything else. So the
Yep.
philosophy was that, but it's morphed into something so much larger and something so much deeper that essentially it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so I mean, the deep state goes into the mid-level of the bureaucracies as well. So even if you fire people at the top, the people under them will get into the top position, and they will follow the same agenda. So you're not really improving the situation here.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. And when the president comes in, I don't know if you know or not, but some people tell me that when they come in that they're kind of read the rules and that essentially this is the way it is and you're going to have to listen to that there truly are people with more power than the president.
Yeah, that's very likely. I mean, it seems that the president is so powerful, but in reality, there are huge limitations on presidential power. I mean, it's the office of the president that's powerful, but the person is not really the office. So
I
the
think that's
person can
clear.
be
Yeah.
replaced, will be replaced after 4 or 8 years. But the office remains, and it comes down to access to power. It comes down to access to information, and it comes down to having support from the bureaucracy. And if that's lacking, then the president can't do that much.
Gosh, that would be so frustrating for somebody who wants to make a difference. I think it would be extremely frustrating, right? You want to make a difference and you have this wall that's in front of you. You can't do anything because they have more money or there's so many different ways that people can be influenced to do the bidding of others.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, right? Okay, so you have multiple books out on different topics. Can you talk about where people can find your books? I know a lot of them are for academic reading, but what do you have and where can people learn more about your work?
Well, I've written 7 books, so I'm working on an 8th book. I've written a book on autonomous weapons, so that was from 2009, got reprinted in 2016, and it seems to be still popular. And I've written a book on military neuroscience, and that's from 2017. And more recently, I wrote on 5th-generation warfare, and the last book was on Havana syndrome, and it's available on Amazon.
Thank you so much. I know I'm going to have you back because I've had you back many times. And thank you so much. And I hope you have a great holiday season with your family and Thanksgiving, which is coming up. I don't know, this will probably air after Thanksgiving. But thank you so much, Armin. And thank you for everything you're doing to inform the public on the realities of just what it is that we're dealing with.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It has been a pleasure to be on your show, and I wish you a happy Thanksgiving too.